Excuse me. All right, let's do this. Let's do a warm up game of Minesweeper. Um, will also be a good litmus test for how impaired I am. So if I can do this game flawlessly, that means that I am perfectly sober and there is nothing to stop me. Um, Pressure really gets to you on stream, not gonna lie. It's a 5 ball. It has to be there, so these have to be safe. That has to be there. So far, so good. No guesses yet. One. This is a nice game so far. It's nothing like super challenging yet, but it is a nice game. Hmm, Can't both there. Hmm, 5, huh? Alright, it's don't want to call it yet, but I think this is a forced guess. There's guaranteed one here. There's one here, and then there's one here, right? Could both be up there. It could be 1, 2, 3, and then something down here. Yeah, this is the forced guess. Okay, what's my best guess? Or my least bad guess? I don't know, here? Okay, that's pretty good. That might have been a great boon. There's one here, one here. One has to be here. The one has to be here, so that has to be safe. These both have to be safe because there can't be two here. So one has to be here, so that means one has to be here, which means that this one has to be safe. Which means that this one has to be a bomb. Which means these are bombs. Which means that's that, 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 that. Fuck you. uh this is a forced 50-50 right here. There's no way out of it. So here goes. Fuck you. Alright. Okay, so it is time to listen to Michael Huemer try to discuss morals. So if you don't know anything about Michael Huemer, he's an analytic philosopher, and I I do not find his philosophy very compelling personally. He's also just kind of a moron, if I'm honest. Like he doesn't think that climate change is that big of a deal. He doesn't think that there's like police brutality against black people, even though there like demonstrably is. Um, he's just kind of like an anti woke type. And he's also a libertarian, which is always a mark of low intelligence. Um, so, you know, but he believes that he has a proof for objective morality. So let's hear what he's got to say. Um,
I tell you this story about how there's this runaway trolley and it's
so
headed for a
what's
fork in the
the
track,
also
and
how's
if
the
you do
audio
nothing, then it's
balancing?
going to run over 5 people and kill them. And you can switch the trolley onto another track, and then it will only hit one person and kill them. Should you switch the trolley? And then most people will have a reaction that you should switch the trolley.
No,
one death is less bad than 5. Okay, but then you give this other example like, oh, you have 5 patients in a hospital who need organ transplants, and you have one healthy patient whose organs could be used to save the other 5. So you could kill the healthy patient, give his organs, and save 5 lives. Should you do that? And then almost everyone will have the reaction that no, you can't do that. Most people have no idea why. So it looks like they have an intuitive sense of right and wrong.
Over the course of your book, you have essentially two.
Okay, cool. I'm not gonna judge these opening lines too much. Just because they could theoretically be clipped out of context.
Arguments that are worth highlighting. You have a negative argument and you have a positive argument. And the negative argument runs by going, hey, these are the 5 main meta-ethical theories. And if I can show that these other 4 are wrong, then we're basically forced to conclude that the 5th theory is correct. And so what I want to do is I want to run through all of these theories one at a time.
Okay,
Professor Michael.
hold on. Well, that's a fucking stupid point. Just be sure if you just because you've shown that 4 out of the 5 theories you present are wrong does not mean that your theory must therefore be correct. Like it could be that all of them are wrong. You know? It could be that that you're picking the best of a bad lot. It could be that there's a position you haven't considered. It could be that the question is incoherent. Like there's a lot of ways in which in which that could be the case.
Huemer, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. What I wanted to run through was essentially your argument for ethical intuitionism. Let me see if I can get the camera to see that. Amazing book. I really enjoyed it. But I wanted to basically lay out the argument top to bottom for objective morality.
Okay. Let's see what he can do.
And I think the best place
there are some like interesting ways he could go with this, but to be fair, I don't actually know what his full argument is going to be. I know that other than that, it's ethical intuitionism.
To start is just by asking, what is metaethics?
So it's a branch of philosophy that kind of studies the nature of ethics. So yeah, ethics is about what's right, wrong, good, and bad. But then there are philosophical questions kind of about what's going on when you're doing ethics. Like, how do we know things about what's right and wrong? And are the facts about right and wrong, are they objective facts, or are they somehow subjective, dependent on the observer? Things like that. And then there's sort of like really moral psychology questions like, oh, well, what motivates people? Why do people do the right thing when they do?
Moral psychology is not metaethics. Moral psychology is moral psychology.
Or, why do they not do it when they don't do it? Right. So, and notice that those questions are not themselves ethical questions. So I ask, how do we know what's right and
why aren't they ethical questions? It seems I don't understand why they couldn't be ethical questions.
wrong? Like the answer to that might be, oh, well, we have ethical intuitions or something, but that's not itself a moral claim.
Why not? In order to say that something is right or wrong in virtue of a moral claim, or a moral intuition rather, do you not have to specify that we ought to take our intuition seriously, or that we ought to defer to our ethical intuitions? Like, is that not itself a moral statement about the status of our intuitions, and what weight we should give to them?
Okay, so it's not
like, it's at least a normative claim. Maybe you want to argue it's not a moral claim, but it's at least normative, so it's kind of in the same ballpark to me.
It's not an ordinary ethics idea. It's a meta-ethics idea, right? Like an idea about what's going on in ethics.
Now, over the course of your book, you have essentially two arguments that are worth highlighting. You have a negative argument and you have a positive argument. And the negative argument runs by going, hey, these are the 5 main meta-ethical theories. And if I can show that these other 4 are wrong, then we're basically forced to conclude that the 5th theory, objective morality, intuitionism, non-naturalism, perhaps, is correct, right?
Yeah, that just doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow. Just because you've shown that the other theories are wrong, and TBD if he can actually show that, but just because you show that 4 out of 5 are like arbitrarily chosen theories are wrong, it doesn't mean that yours is correct by default. You could also be wrong. All of them could be wrong. We could have just not figured out the correct meta-ethical theory yet.
And so what I want to do is I want to run through all of these theories one at a time. Now, a good place to start is, of course, what are the 5 main metaethical theories?
Yeah, good question. So like a lot of the discussion in metaethics centered around whether there are objective values or whether there are objective evaluative truths. And what that means is something like, are there truths about what's good, bad, right, and wrong that are independent of the attitudes of observers?
Yeah, I mean, also, like, forced to conclude is also normative, So aren't you kind of presupposing, like, a normative theory there too? Like, who's forcing me to conclude it? What's stopping me from concluding something else? Are the laws of nature stopping me?
Towards the things that are being evaluated. Right, so murder is wrong. Is that an objective evaluative truth? Okay, so it's evaluative, but is it objective? So that means something like, is it wrong independent of how we feel about murder or what we think or what we desire or something like that? Okay, so then the 5 meta-ethical theories are kind of responses to that. The people who say, yes, there are objective evaluative facts, they think that these evaluative facts either they are or they are not reducible. So, and reducible means something like you could explain what the thing is without using evaluative language. So like I could explain what wrongness is without using moral terms. Okay, so these people are known as naturalists, ethical naturalists, or reductionists. Like an example would be if you think that for an action to be right is for it to produce the most amount of pleasure possible on the available actions. Okay, so that would be explaining rightness in terms of just a descriptive fact. Okay, and then
maybe, I don't know. I don't love the way that analytic philosophers categorize this stuff personally. But sure. Oh, did not mean to.
They're the other. Okay, by the way, sorry, I should have this term, moral realism. The moral realists are the people who think that there are objective values. Okay, so one form of moral realism is naturalism.
Oh, fuck you.
I tell you the story about how there's this also the intuitionists, right? So, okay, so one form of moral realism is naturalism, where there are objective values and they can be explained without using evaluative language. Okay, and then there are the non-naturalists, also the intuitionists, right? So the non-naturalists are basically intuitionists. So they think that these.
Well, hold on. No. That's not true. That's not true at all. Like, do you think that, like, do you think Kant was an intuitionist? Like, he certainly wasn't an intuitionist in the way that you mean it, I don't think. Like, he didn't think that your morals were just something that you, like, felt inside of you. But arguably, that's non-naturalist, Kant's moral philosophy. So, there's one example.
Objective evaluative truths cannot be reduced. So you cannot explain what rightness is without using other evaluative language. The naturalists and the intuitionists also disagree about how we know about moral truths. So the naturalists usually try to give some kind of empirical or possibly even scientific explanation of how we know. And the ethical intuitionists will say, well, we have this thing called intuition, where it just sort of becomes self-evident. Certain moral truths are sort of self-evident. Okay.
Yeah, so that's just like not all non-naturalists are that. Case in point, Immanuel Kant did not think that it just became self-evident at some point that that some things are morally right or are wrong. Because, like, if people, in fact, like, in a lot of ways, his philosophy was quite counterintuitive. It was intuitive in the sense that he meant intuition, like it followed from it followed from, like, the principles of the way we are, but it's not intuitive in the way that Huemer is using it. So, like, that's already arguably the most important modern philosopher disagreeing with that.
Okay, so then those are the realists, and then the anti-realists are the people who think that there are no objective values. And there are three varieties of that. So if you think that there aren't any objective evaluative truths, it could be because you think that evaluative statements are neither true nor false, or it could be because you think that they're always false, or it could be you think that, no, they're sometimes true, but the truth depends on the attitudes of observers. Okay, and so if you think about that, you see that there's just three possibilities. There's just three ways of being an anti-realist. Okay, so if you think that they're neither true nor false, usually what they say is the reason they're neither true nor false is that evaluative statements are not really making assertions about.
Well, hold on a second.
If you think about that, you see that they think that, no, they're sometimes true, but the truth depends on the attitudes of observers.
Okay, so that isn't at all the only three flavors. It could be that unless you want to expand observers to mean, like, a lot of different things, but there are other ways to conceive of anti-realism or non-realism.
Okay, and so if you think about that, you see that there's just three possibilities. There's just three ways of being an anti-realist. Okay, so if you think that they're neither true nor false, usually what they say is the reason they're neither true nor false is that evaluative statements are not really making assertions about anything. They're really just expressions of your emotions, or they're expressing desires, or they're, like, trying to influence other people's behavior. So when you say murder is wrong, maybe you're just expressing bad feelings about murder, like boo on murder, or maybe you're just trying to stop other people from committing murder. So it's like saying don't murder. Okay, and those are neither true nor false. Okay, so all right, so then murder's wrong would be neither true nor false. Okay, so that's
see, this is where debates in analytic philosophy just confuse me, because this should be like an orthogonal question. Like, what we say or what we mean when we say murder is wrong shouldn't have any bearing on, like, it shouldn't have any bearing on whether or not morals are real or not. Because it could be that morals are real, and also, pragmatically, we are just expressing attitudes towards things. No? Like, these are just not these are actually like compatible claims. It could be that the non-naturalist is correct, that there are abstract entities that instantiate moral properties, but it could also be the case that in practice, when we make evaluative judgments, we are just expressing attitudes. Like these are compatible positions.
It's the non-cognitivist view or expressivist. And then there's the subjectivist view where moral statements could be true, but the truth depends on attitudes of observers. So maybe murder is wrong. Maybe that's true because our society disapproves of murder. So like that.
Society isn't an observer. Society's not an observer. Society doesn't observe. People observe. So if murder is wrong because society disapproves of murder, that's not being wrong in virtue of what observers think. That's being wrong in terms of a codified social structure, not an observer. So already just you've failed to find a fourth option that is right there in front of you.
That would be the subjectivist view. It's just a fact about people's attitudes, maybe society's attitudes, or maybe even just your personal attitude. So maybe when I say murder is wrong, I'm just describing my negative attitude towards murder. It's
also still compatible with non-cognitivist theories, by the way.
True that I disapprove of it, so then it's true that murder is wrong. Okay. And then lastly, there are the nihilists or the error theorists. These are people who think that basically evaluative statements are false. And why would they think this? So basically they think nothing is good, bad, right, or wrong. And they think this because they think that when you say murder is wrong, you're attributing a certain kind of property, like an objective evaluative property, to the act of murder.
Yeah, and this is the problem. All of the theories that he's listed so far have problems because all of them try to make totalizing statements about like what moral statements mean and what people intend when they use moral statements. But it's just like it completely flattens the the linguistic diversity that people have. Like how do you know that you are attributing the property back? If I say something like murder is wrong, how do you know that I personally am attributing the property wrongness to murder? How do you know? Are you looking inside of my brain? Just because it has that linguistic form does not mean that that's what it means to me, right? So I don't know, like why is this something that you're debating in a philosophy class as opposed to like asking people what they mean by it?
And they think nothing has any such property. So you're saying something false. Right. So okay. So then and by the way, just as a slight modification, they would say that the positive moral statements are false. And by positive, I mean statements where you're ascribing a moral property to a thing. So murder is wrong would be false, but murder is not wrong would be true. Okay, so
no, not really. That's not correct. That's not correct. Because it could be that you just deny that well, hold on. I guess you could parse that as correct. But the problem is that people think when you say it's correct that they think murder is not wrong, it means something different to you than it means to them. Because when they say murder is not wrong, they just mean that there is no property wrong that applies to the act murder. And there couldn't be in principle, you know? Like what's like maybe a better way? So like here's an example. Some error theorists are fictionalists, which means that basically they think that moral discourse should continue as is, whether or not the properties that are attributed in moral discourse obtain, right? So but here's a good example, right? Would they say, Voldemort, or would you say Voldemort is evil? Well, in a sense, yes, but if we're going to like make a claim about for example, strictly speaking, no. Voldemort is not evil because Voldemort doesn't exist and thus does not have the property of being evil. According to analytic philosophers, this is like a much more complicated question than that, and like whether or not predicates apply to fictional entities or not. But just assuming for a second that they don't, like somebody, I think, like if somebody said Voldemort isn't evil because Voldemort isn't real and thus doesn't have the property of being evil, I think that would make some amount of sense to people. But in saying Voldemort is not evil, it does not mean that they approve of Voldemort's actions as depicted in the Harry Potter books, right? So there's kind of it's going to be the same for an error theorist, right? When they say murder is not wrong, they don't mean murder is they don't mean it in the same way that somebody else might mean it, like a moral realist would mean it if they said murder is not wrong. So it's just like I dislike this strategy because I think it unfairly denigrates error theorists, and kind of pushes them into a position that they don't hold by virtue of rhetoric.
So, both of those sound like evaluative statements, but only one of them is ascribing a moral property. Yeah.
So there's a semantic component here, which is to say that like the error theorist or the nihilist is saying, no, when we make a moral claim, we are talking as if there was an objective truth of the matter, but we're just wrong every single time. Every time we make a positive claim, we're 100% of the time we're wrong.
Right, yeah. Right, nothing is good or bad, nothing is right or wrong.
Right. Now, a question I have before we get into each of the theories in more detail is, given that your negative argument depends on, kind of going through each of these theories one by one and going, this is wrong, this one's wrong, this one's wrong, and then we're left with the last one, which would be intuitionism, objective morality, naturalism, whatever you want to call it. For that to be true, these 5 positions need to be exhaustive.
Okay, let's hear it.
Do these 5 positions map out the entire space of possible answers in metaethics?
Well, so that's why I was trying to explain why there were only these 3 ways of not having objective values. Now, you could think that there are some possibilities I didn't mention, like there could be hybrid views.
Right.
Like maybe some moral statements are non-cognitive, maybe some of them are false. Maybe okay. That's not going to make a big difference because the arguments that I give against each of these views, they're going to work against. You could just like take a paradigm moral statement, like murder's wrong, and whatever the person wants to say about that, I could give the arguments for why they would be wrong about that particular statement. The other thing is, like
what? Hold on.
I mentioned at some point in the book, well, there could be a view where you mix parts of naturalism and intuitionism, because the way I described it, there are 2 issues. There's the epistemological issue of how we know about moral truths, and then there's this sort of metaphysical issue of whether the moral truths are reducible. Okay, so the naturalists think they're reducible, and we have empirical knowledge.
So if he's not going to address that, I don't think that that's how it works. Like, even if you have, again, I've already explained that hybrid views are not the only option here, because, again, like a socially constructed view of morals, or a constructivist view in general of morals, does not necessarily proceed the way that Michael Huemer says. Because he just says it's reducible to what observers think, but that's not what the constructivist has to say. Like, and his own example is what, like, maybe murder is wrong means society deems murder to be wrong, and society is not an observer. So there you go. That's an example. But regardless, I don't think that by refuting the components of hybrid views that you thereby refuted hybrid views, because it could be that, like, in refuting them with respect to it could be that the arguments that you use to refute them are like mutually, how do I explain? Like, maybe they're mutually incompatible arguments with one another that you use to refute them. And in that way, you're not really refuting it. You're just taking a contradictory position, and then declaring that the other person is wrong because you've given arguments against it which are not mutually coherent.
And intuitionists think they're irreducible, and we have intuitive a priori knowledge. You could conceivably have somebody who thinks like they're reducible, but our knowledge is a priori, right? Or they're irreducible, but our knowledge is empirical. Conceivably, but I don't know of anyone who's ever held either of those views.
And so,
okay, it doesn't matter if nobody has ever held those views. You still have to refute it. It's still an option. It doesn't matter if anybody's held it or not. If it's a possible option, then you have to refute it.
The line of reasoning goes, even if there were hybrid views, like it doesn't seem like either of us know any examples of hybrid views off the top of our head. But if there were, if you can just knock down the two components of the hybrid view, you're knocking down the hybrid view anyways.
Well, yeah.
No, that's not how it works. Because it could be that your knockdowns against the hybrid views are mutually inconsistent with one another. So it doesn't necessarily follow that if you knock down both sides of the hybrid view, that therefore you have knocked down the hybrid view.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, like, so like, it's not a crazy thing. Like, you might think different evaluative statements just work differently. There might be cases that are better examples for subjectivism. Whether something is a dirty movie, so maybe dirty is an evaluative term. Like, oh, maybe that's culturally relative. So okay, like that might be more plausible, and then maybe there'd be some other whatever, maybe other statements where you say a different thing about them. But basically, like, well, if you just focus on a paradigmatic moral statement, like they could say different things about different moral statements, but about any particular.
Wait, why do you get to? Hold on. Why do you get to pick the moral statements? Why can't they pick the evaluative statements?
The moral statement, they're going to have some anti-realist view of that, and then I'm going to claim that my arguments in the book refute that view about that statement.
Okay, so I want to jump into each theory now more in depth, starting with non-cognitivism. So non-cognitivism, as you described, is basically it's a theory about language. It's a theory about semantics. It's arguing that every time we make
yeah. So this is just like this is the problem, is that these people are stuck in representation. Like they're stuck in what do moral terms represent, and instead of like what are they doing, And non-cognitivists are kind of still in that boat because they're saying that like there is actually meaning over here. It's just that morals don't express it. But like, what if it's all non-cognitive?
A moral utterance, every time we make a moral claim or a moral proposition, these do not actually have truth values. That we're really just expressing, say, our emotional dispositions, or we're committing ourselves to certain prescriptions we would give people in relevantly similar circumstances.
Yeah.
The question I have is, why are philosophers even doing semantics in the first place? Like, isn't this fundamentally an empirical question?
Oh, yes, but it's an empirical.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also, sorry I didn't acknowledge you earlier, Denyuv. Welcome to the stream. Thank you for being here.
Question.
Doing semantics in the first place. Like, isn't this fundamentally an empirical question?
Oh, yes, but it's an empirical question that a lot of people have access to by understanding English, by being a native English speaker.
No. That's not how it works.
So, and philosophers are pretty good at giving arguments about what things mean. So, like
says who? Who says that they're actually like quite bad at giving arguments about what things mean? That's my hot take. I think that philosophers are like actually quite disconnected from what people actually mean when they use a given utterance. Because they don't talk to people enough. So they're not very connected with what people actually think and what they actually mean. So they just kind of like they first principles it, and they like presume that the way that they think about it is the way that everyone else thinks about it.
There was this trend in the 20th century, the movement of analytic philosophy originated with people who thought that the job of philosophers was to analyze meanings of words or to analyze concepts or something. So they got pretty good at it. And, by the way,
no, they didn't. They didn't get very good at it. They got just because that's what they thought does not mean that they actually got pretty good at it. Like, it is an empirical question. And when philosophers analyze the meanings of words, they don't always appeal to empirical data about what the words mean. That's like a cognitive linguistic question.
As you said that it's a semantic view. An interesting thing to note is that the difference between the different forms of anti-realism is semantic. Actually, I think I said this in the book, like maybe in the first chapter, that actually there's just one metaphysical issue. The intuitionists differ from everyone else on this kind of ontological issue, and everyone else just differs from each other semantically. Okay, so like the intuitionists think that there's a kind of fact in addition to the descriptive facts of the world, roughly speaking, and nobody else does. The other four views, including the naturalists, they all think there's only the descriptive facts.
Right, so in some sense, the naturalist realist is actually closer to the anti-realist because they reduce everything.
Yeah.
The only people who don't want to reduce evaluative statements, normative statements, is the intuitionist.
Yes.
So it's like you guys are in a camp of your own.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, like.
But again, non-naturalism doesn't necessarily mean intuitionist. There are other non-naturalists who are not intuitionists.
The way I described it is sort of the traditional taxonomy. It's realism versus anti-realism. Then you break down realism into two forms. Okay, but like another way of thinking about it is there's dualism versus monism. Monism is there's one kind of fact, and dualism.
Also, to be clear, just because you think that relativism and constructivism are not necessarily reductive views, they're not necessarily reducing it to something else. Because it emerges in actual practice. Like, I don't think that it needs to be something that they're reducing to like all of the mental states of all of the people in society.
Dualism is there's two fundamentally different kinds of facts, and the intuitionists are the only dualists. And then among the monists, there's the reductionists and the whatever non-reductionists, eliminativists.
Now, non-cognitivism is it's a broad family of theories. There's at least a couple like sub-theories within them, and I want to go one by one through them all. But I want to start with prescriptivism. What is prescriptivism, and what's wrong with it?
Oh, well, and what's wrong with the different varieties of non-cognitivism is going to be pretty much the same. Okay, so prescriptivists are people who think that when you make moral statements, it's like issuing a command. Like when I say murder is wrong, it's like saying don't murder. Okay, now it's not exactly like that. It's sort of like there's a little bit differences between saying murder is wrong and saying don't murder. Like when I say murder is wrong, it's like I'm issuing this command to everyone and I'm claiming some kind of universality. And I'm not claiming, it's sort of like I'm not relying on my own personal authority. It's like I'm trying to get people to stop murdering, but just like regardless, they're not supposed to care about who I am in saying this. So it's a little bit different from other kinds of commands. But nevertheless, the main thing is, I'm trying to influence people's behavior. I'm not trying to describe a fact about the world.
So, okay, so then if the same objection is going to be lobbed against all the theories. Let's go through the various theories now. Prescriptivism, moral claims are really just prescriptions, fundamentally. Emotivism is maybe more familiar for people listening, which is roughly what? What is emotivism?
When you make moral claims, you're expressing your emotions or expressing attitudes other than beliefs. You're not expressing what you think about how some fact in the world is. You're expressing.
Yeah, and this is the problem with non-cognitivists, is that they think that there actually are beliefs on the one hand and emotions and judgments on the other.
How you feel about something. So murder is wrong is kind of like boo on murder.
Right.
Again, it's not exactly like that. And there's some kind of universality, like you're saying boo on murder and things that are like murder or something like that.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to do it for just like one individual token action. So you're not supposed to do, it's wrong to murder. It's wrong for me to murder, but it's not wrong for you to murder. You're not supposed to do that. But anyway, okay. But the main thing is, you're not describing a fact. You're expressing your feelings.
Now, what's wrong with these theories then? What's wrong with non-cognitivism?
Yeah. And by the way, like when you tell students about this, like a lot of students have a really hard time distinguishing emotivism from subjectivism.
Right.
Like I have a hard time seeing the difference between saying, oh, you're expressing your feelings and saying you're describing your feelings.
Right. So the claim is not, I don't like murder, because that's a factual statement, or it could be true or false.
Yeah.
You're saying boo murder. You're just expressing your emotive disposition against the act, and maybe acts of relevantly similar, within relevantly similar circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. So like if I say, well, I'm against murder.
Oh, I'm so stupid. Maybe I am. Maybe the alcohol's working on me.
Well, that's just true. That's just in fact true, and there shouldn't be any dispute on that. But if you say boo on murder, that's neither true nor false. That's not a proposition.
And so the fundamental issue against emotivism is what the Frege-Gage problem, the embedding problem.
Right. Yeah. So like they've got an explanation of what murder is wrong means when you state it just by itself.
Right.
But they don't have an explanation of what murder is wrong means when it appears within a wider sentence where the person is not asserting that murder is wrong. So okay. So I say I wonder whether abortion is wrong. And now what does that mean? So abortion is wrong supposedly means boo on abortion. Or alternately, it means don't have an abortion. But then what does it mean if I say?
Yeah, so this is just a semantics versus pragmatics thing. The non-cognitivist is perfectly within their right to just say that semantically, that the semantics and the pragmatics don't match up here. Like, imagine Michael Huemer is at a party, all right? And Michael Huemer is talking about his ethical theories, and everybody fucking hates him because he's an idiot, right? And so the party host goes up to Michael Huemer and says, "There's the door," and points to the door. Semantically, what does "there's the door" mean? It means the door is over there. The thing that I'm pointing at is the door. That's where it is. Pragmatically, what does it mean when I say there's the door? It means leave. It means leave. Like that's what it actually means, So the Frege-Geach problem, the problem with the Frege-Geach problem is that just because you can present sentences where semantically it seems like murder is wrong, or I wonder if X is wrong or right or obligatory or whatever, just because you can present sentences where it semantically makes sense that that's the case, it does not mean that in practice, when people make evaluative judgments about things, or when they make moral propositions, that in fact they are making, that they are semantic, that their intention matches the semantics. You know, it just doesn't, it does not follow at all that that's the case. Hold on a second. No, I don't want top chat. I want live chat. So, you know, like it just doesn't follow. The Frege-Geach problem says nothing about non-cognitivism, because a non-cognitivist can just say that the semantics are misleading. You know, and you know, I'm sure that in practice, if Michael Huemer heard "there's the door," he would understand that he's being asked to leave. You know, he wouldn't think, oh, well, semantically, it means that the door is over there. So thank you for telling me the door is over there. No, of course not. So, you know, and this is why I say that, oh shit, sorry. This is why I say that philosophers are not good at actually defining the meanings of words. You know, they're not actually good at this. Because this is like something anybody who has like interacted with another human being should know. That the semantics of a sentence and the pragmatics of a sentence are not the same. This should be obvious. But they just pretend to forget this, or they just ignore it.
I wonder whether abortion is wrong. I wonder whether boo on abortion, or I wonder whether don't have an abortion. These don't even make sense. Right. It's not just like a grammatical point. It's that you don't understand what the person would be trying to say if someone said something like that. It just doesn't make sense.
And even and moral reasoning seems to lend itself to a logical analysis. So it seems that we can do conditional statements. If murder is wrong, then don't kill Bobby. The emotivist would interpret that as, if boo murder, then don't kill Bobby. If boo murder...
Yeah, they're not forced to interpret it that way at all. Because again, the semantics and the pragmatics are not the same here.
Doesn't make sense. There needs to be a truth value for the conditional to make sense. So it breaks logic at a fundamental level. But intuitively, it seems like we can reason logically about moral statements.
Yeah. So, you know, that...
Really? So in that case, like, here's maybe another example, right? If I say something like, pineapple is gross, you know, plausibly I could be saying something like, yuck, pineapple, right? But is that refuted by the idea that I can construct a sentence like, what was the sentence that...
Then don't kill Bobby. Statements. If murder is wrong, then don't kill Bobby. And moral reasoning seems to lend itself to a logical analysis. So it seems that we can do conditional statements. If murder is wrong, then don't kill Bobby. The emotivist would interpret that as, if boo murder, then don't kill Bobby. If boo murder doesn't make sense. There needs to be a truth.
Yeah. So if something like pineapple is gross means yuck, pineapple, is this refuted by the idea that I can construct a sentence like, if pineapple is gross, don't eat pineapple upside down cake? Does that follow? Or pineapple is gross, therefore don't eat Hawaiian pizza? Like, does this refute the idea that in pragmatically, pineapple is gross is me expressing my emotions toward pineapple? Of course not. Because again, semantics, pragmatics, different things.
Value for the conditional to make sense. So it breaks logic at a fundamental level. But intuitively, it seems like we can reason logically about moral statements.
Yeah. So, you know, that, like, I gave the example of I wonder whether, and then you can put in a value statement. But there's like a whole bunch of kinds of statements where you can come up with.
See, this as if is key. So a lot of the emotivists, after hearing about the Frege-Geach problem, also known as the embedding problem, they've reacted and they've come up with a more sophisticated theory. So Simon Blackburn, Alan Gibbard, for instance, they've come up with quasi-realism, what is quasi-realism and what's wrong with it?
I don't care.
I think it's sort of like trying to explain how you can talk exactly as if moral statements were expressing propositions, even though they're not. Right?
How do they do that?
But I mean, I think you basically have to come.
Why can't I? Why couldn't I? Just because they don't express propositions does not necessarily mean that I can't talk as if they do. There's nothing like stopping me metaphysically from doing that. All right, I'm jumping to naturalism.
Yeah.
So what is naturalism, and why is naturalism false?
Yeah, the ethical naturalists think that, well, as we were saying earlier, they think that moral truths can be reduced. Okay, so there's evaluative language.
I disagree with naturalism for what it's worth. I'm not a moral naturalist. I don't think that moral claims can be reduced in that way.
That sort of by its meaning entails that something is good or bad, a positive or negative meaning about something. And then there's non-evaluative language, okay, which whatever doesn't inherently imply good or bad. Okay, so the naturalists think that you can explain the nature of a moral truth using non-evaluative language. Like you could explain what makes it the case that murder is wrong without using right, wrong, good, bad, or any other evaluative words. Okay, and then typically they also think that you have some kind of empirical knowledge of the evaluative facts, which I think is just a confusion on their part.
Yeah, they'll say something like, we can know that goodness and pleasure are really the same thing, the same way that we eventually found out that water and H2O were the same thing.
Yeah.
Right, but there seems to be in epistemic.
Water and H2 are not the same thing. Water conducts electricity. H2O does not conduct electricity.
Problem there.
Yeah, it's like it's not at all the same at all, right? This is how we know. And by the way, that example that you gave, that is the kind of thing that they would say. They would give these examples of where you found out that something is really something else that's described in terms of a scientific theory. The way that we know that water is H2O is there are two experiments that you can do. One is electrolysis of a sample of water, where you can apply an electric potential and you get bubbles of hydrogen gas forming at one end and bubbles of oxygen gas, okay? Which, by the way, at the time they did this experiment, hydrogen wasn't called hydrogen, it was called inflammable air or something like that. Anyway, okay. But anyway, you could verify that you're getting these two different gases. The mass of water is decreasing and the mass of the gases is increasing by the same amount. So the water is turning into hydrogen oxygen, okay? And then the other thing is you can have hydrogen and oxygen and you can ignite them. And then...
Why couldn't... Okay, I'll just...
The amount of gas. Specific empirical observations that are explained by the hypothesis that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. There's nothing like that with the naturalist theories of morality. Right? There is not a specific observation that can be explained by thinking that goodness is pleasure. That can't be explained by somebody who has a different view about goodness.
Hold on. But that's not what was the... Hold on. Wait a second.
These are specific empirical observations that are explained by the hypothesis that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. There's nothing like that.
Okay, but they're not... They are explained by that hypothesis, but they are not... It is not like necessarily the case that this is true just because it's explained by it. Something can explain another thing and also be false, right? So it could also be explained by God intervening to make the water bubble with hydrogen bubbles, right? Is that a good explanation? No, I don't think so. But it could be explained like that. It is consistent with the observation, right? And so now listen to what he says here.
With the naturalist theories of morality. Right? There is not a specific observation that can be explained by thinking that goodness is pleasure. That can't be explained by somebody who has a different view about goodness.
Yeah. So notice now he has shifted the goalposts. He has shifted it from can you do an experiment or can you make an observation that explains it to can you make an observation that explains it and precludes every other explanation, which is impossible because there is no such thing. There is no observation you can make about any natural process that precludes every other potential explanation. It's not possible because there are an infinite number of explanations.
Right. And that comparison is particularly important. Like, it has to be that this theory explains things that are not explained if you have different views. So if you think...
No, that is not what it has to mean. It could be that, again, I'm not a naturalist, but it could be that it is better explained by naturalism. than it is by non-naturalism. Just because they are explanatorily equivalent does not necessarily mean that you have to value them equally. Because again, the hypothesis that God intervenes in every natural process to make it happen exactly as it does is consistent with our observations. But it does not mean that we ought to take that observation seriously. So a naturalist, I think, could just respond and say, yes, your moral theory also explains these same observations. However, my explanation is still better.
That water is made of sodium chloride.
I feel like this all comes from a misunderstanding of linguistics. Like, water isn't H2O, but water is complex. And like the mathematical law of identity doesn't apply with these things. I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. My point that water is not H2O was kind of a side point. There's a great paper on why water is not H2O. That I encourage everyone to look up. It's free. But anyway.
Chloride, you cannot explain those experimental results, right? But if you think that pleasure is bad, there's nothing that you can't explain that could be explained by a person who thinks pleasure is good.
What if we, hypothetically, we do a bunch of philosophy, AI helps us out, and we reach perfect reflective equilibrium, and we have the perfect theory of morality, and we find out, oh, turns out all we actually meant this entire time when we were talking about moral statements is maximizing positive.
Yeah, this is just like, because there is no one single thing that people mean when they make a moral statement. That's just not how it works. Like, we're stuck in representation here, where we are trying to find, like, the extension of moral statements. Like, an extension in the sense of, like, the things in the world that it applies to. Instead of asking, like, what are moral statements doing? And what are statements in general doing? What does language do? We're, like, so stuck in what does it represent that we're completely ignoring what it does.
States of consciousness, robustly over long time averages, let's say, something like that. At that point, wouldn't we be justified in saying, okay, goodness and pleasure, or goodness and positive valence of consciousness are the same thing?
Well, you're sort of like stipulating that we found that out, but I don't know how we would find that out.
I don't know why you're objecting to this hypothetical now. This is perfectly reasonable as far as analytic philosophy hypotheticals go.
It could have been that by good we just meant causes pleasure. There could be a language in which good means causes pleasure.
Well, the argument against that is what Moore's open question argument.
Right, yeah.
Run us through that real quick.
Which, by the way, I think it's a slightly a misnomer, because Moore does not use the phrase open question a lot. But anyway, okay, it's basically you just take some question about pleasure and then substitute good for pleasure, and then you notice that it doesn't mean the same thing. Right? So somebody says, yeah, I think that X is good just means X causes pleasure. Okay, and then I can say something like, but is pleasure really good? And then you're supposed to just...
I hate G.E. Moore so much.
Notice that does not mean the same as, does pleasure really cause pleasure? Right? Or is goodness really good? It doesn't mean those things.
Well, but that's the key here, and this is where you're showing you are an intuitionist fundamentally. It seems...
And just to be clear, just to make it clear, the H2O example from earlier, if you say water is H2O, it's also the case that you can say, but is water really H2O? Like, linguistically, there is nothing incoherent about saying that. And given that Michael Huemer believes that water is H2O, this should refute the idea that water is H2O. Right? Like, because it shouldn't make any sense to say, is water H2O? Or to ask, is water really H2O? Because then you draw... If you translate it, it's like asking, is water water? Just like is asking, is pleasure pleasure? Or is goodness good? You know?
Seems that way.
Yeah. That does not mean the same as, does pleasure really cause pleasure? Right? Or is goodness really good? It doesn't mean those things.
Well, but that's the key here.
Yeah, see? And is water really H2O it doesn't mean the same thing as is water water and is H2O H2O. These are like not These are not the same thing linguistically. Ergo, H2O and water, not the same thing.
And this is where you're showing you are an intuitionist fundamentally. It seems that way.
Yeah.
The common response to the open question argument is to just deny that it feels like an open question. To say that, when you swap out these words, it seems like the meaning has shifted. What if I just go, no, doesn't seem that way to me?
Then you're probably lying.
Great. Fuck you, dude. You're probably lying. What the arrogance of this guy. Holy shit. How do you know? How would you know if they're lying? What kind of closed-mindedness does it take to think that, everything that you think is what everyone else must think?
Well, so just like most people can see that, is pleasure good does not mean the same as does pleasure cause pleasure. I don't think that there's anybody who actually doesn't see that.
I don't think that it seems to me like there's no one who thinks that. Therefore, it's true. What the fuck are we doing, man? I just don't think there's anyone who believes that. Well, have you checked? Have you done a survey to ask?
By the way, if you think that there would be no way of justifying the naturalist theory if we don't have any access to what we mean. If the person is thinking that good just means causes pleasure or something like that, they must think that we have some access to what we mean by words. Right? And I don't know how we would have any access to it if we can't trust intuitive judgments, even in seemingly the best circumstances, right?
Now the naturalist.
Okay. The problem is that whose intuitive judgments, and why is it your intuitive judgment?
Wants to reduce all evaluative or normative or moral claims to just descriptive claims or claims about the natural world, things that science can help us investigate. If we want to reject naturalism, how much does this depend on the is-ought gap being a real thing?
Well, I guess it completely depends on that. So yeah, the is-ought gap, the difference between, the gap noticed by, sort of like the inferential gap noticed by David Hume, that you can't infer an ought statement from is statements. So you have facts about just the way the world is that doesn't tell you how things ought to be, or maybe more broadly, you just have the non-evaluative facts and that they don't logically entail an evaluation. Well, let's say it would be very different if you could do that. But it's sort of I don't see how you could think that. I don't see how you could think that you could deduce evaluative claims from non-evaluative.
So there's one sense in which,
because meaning is after affect. There you go. That's one way of doing it. Language is affective. It doesn't transfer meaning. Meaning is generated after the affect. That's one, and affect engenders specific responses in us, specific attitudes. So that's one way to do it.
Which evaluation and description are actually one and the same. And it seems to be that when you pay close enough attention to consciousness, things don't merely present themselves as facts, and that the evaluation kind of is lopped on top. Things present themselves as truly good or bad intrinsically. So if you put your hand on a stove, you're not doing an inferential derivation in first order logic about, pain is bad, I'm feeling pain, ow, therefore this is bad. And then no, it presents itself phenomenologically, some would say, as just being bad. Are there any likes to an argument?
I don't agree with that. I think the badness is also I don't think that it presents as being bad necessarily. I think it has an effect on us, and that generates a meaning and an image in us. But I don't think it means that we instinctively know that putting our hand on a hot stove is bad. I still think it bridges the is-ought gap in a way, but I don't think that this is the right way to do it.
Argument like this that would want to attack the is-ought gap by saying, no, they're actually one and the same.
So when you feel the pain, you're just immediately aware of the badness of it. But as you just suggested, it's not that you inferred that it was bad from a descriptive fact about it. You're just immediately aware of the badness. So that sounds to me more like what intuitionists say.
Either one of the... Is this guy Moon Man from the Tim... What? I don't think so. I've never seen this guy on Tim Pool. This guy's a philosopher. Can you believe that? He's taken seriously in analytic philosophy. It's insane, isn't it? How did we let this happen? Hold on a second. Yeah. Oh my god. We are, like, so fucked. He has an H index of 37. His most cited paper has 1,000 citations. Or book. I guess this is the book. Yeah, it's a book. This is the exact same book that they're talking about. This shit has 1,200 citations. The absolute state of analytic philosophy, man. Yeah.
The naturalist would be saying, oh no, there's not two different facts there, I guess, right? Although, by the way, I don't think this is a common naturalist view. I don't know. But I'm just sort of using this because it's a simple view that, good is whatever causes pleasure. I don't know if that was widely held. But okay. And then, badness would be causing pain, maybe. They'd be saying there's not even a distinct fact. And so, you could imagine somebody who thinks, maybe there would be religious people who think that pleasure is bad, or maybe they think certain kinds of pleasures are bad, and maybe they think they're even intrinsically bad. And then, like, well, on the naturalist view, then they would just have to be incoherent, right? They would just, right? It would just have to be a view that doesn't make any sense, because
why? Why does it have to be a view that doesn't make any sense? Like, again, just to use your own example, if I say water isn't H2O, that must be an incoherent claim from your perspective, since you believe that they are identical. But I think it's quite coherent, in fact. So, if I'm wrong, then, like, why can't the naturalist make a similar claim to you?
these would be people who think that goodness isn't good or something like that, right?
Or they would be mistaken about what they actually perceive.
I'm imagining something that's the person's actual accepted view, right? Not a perception. This could just be their philosophical view. Because there are these ascetic monks or something who try to live a life with minimal pleasure or something like that. So maybe they think pleasure is bad, or at least that it isn't good. At least it isn't intrinsically good, or something like that. Okay, so are those people just incoherent? Yeah. So like on the naturalist view, there's only one property that they could be talking. There's only one property. There's a pleasure and the goodness.
Now, this is the final intuition that I think motivates naturalism, which is supervenience, which is to say, if we list all of the descriptive facts of the world, aren't we done? Like, why are we adding these additional alleged facts of normative, evaluative facts? Like, if we describe reality perfectly, descriptively, it seems like our job's finished. We can go home.
Well, it doesn't seem that way. It seems that you haven't said what's good or bad. There's like this whole field of ethics where they talk about, how to evaluate things. So it looks like that wouldn't be foreclosed by just having the descriptive facts, right? And then, like you could imagine somebody who knows the descriptive facts of a situation, then he's thinking, so what should I do?
Right. This is kind of a Kantian point. Like, we're still almost necessarily forced into a state of consciousness in which we have to decide how to act. Like, at least at the very least, it seems like we can make decisions. And so when you're faced with that situation where you have to make a decision, you're kind of forced to use evaluative language or to use.
I'm bored by this one.
So I do want to take this opportunity. I want to jump into subjectivism now, because partially because your character.
Full disclosure, I am a relativist, so they would like put me under this label. I think they would consider me a subjectivist. I don't consider myself a subjectivist. I consider myself a relativist, but
characterization of subjectivism is interesting because you include certain theories that most people wouldn't include under subjectivism. But also, I do think there's certain forms of subjectivism I would have liked you to address more. So let's start from the top. What is subjectivism in ethics?
Yeah, so I'm using this broadly, which might be broader than the way other people use it, but it's a view according to which there are evaluative truths, but they depend on the attitudes of observers towards the objects of evaluation.
Yeah. His own reminder, his own example of this is murder is wrong, like, of a subjectivist view in his thing, is murder is wrong because society says murder is wrong. That's his description of, like, a subjectivist view. And remember, again, that he says the subjectivist view says that evaluative claims are true in virtue of what the observers claim about them. But society is not an observer. Society doesn't observe you doing anything. Society is an abstraction. So if your own example of subjectivism, which you define as being about what observers think, does not include any observers and what they think, then clearly your definition is not exhaustive.
So, like, it could be true that X is good, but the goodness of X depends upon somebody's attitudes about X. So it could be the individual who's speaking. So it could be that X is good means I, the speaker, like X. Or it could be society. Like maybe X is good means society approves of X. Or in perhaps the example that you were...
Yeah, hold on.
Or it could be society. So it could be the individual who's speaking. So it could be that X is good means I, the speaker, like X. Or it could be society. Like maybe X is good means society approves of X.
But society isn't an observer. What are we doing here? Can I hurt society's feelings?
Or in perhaps the example that you were alluding to earlier, it could be X is good means God likes X, God approves of X, or something like that.
So you're lumping divine command theory under subjectivism because...
That's correct, you should.
Technically, under a lot of conceptions of God, God is a subject. And if God is the right maker behind moral act...
This is true, but under better conceptions of theism, God is not a subject. Like, so society must be defended.
Actions or moral statements being true or false. It's technically a subjective...
But yeah, like I would say that for a lot of people, divine command theory absolutely is subjectivist, but technically speaking, and I want to say this, like, it is not necessarily the case that God is a subject. There are theistic views under which God acts by necessity, and thus is not like a moral subject in the same way that a person is a moral subject. Like God is not a person, even. You know, Spinoza comes to mind. You know, Spinoza does not have like a personal God who is a subject. Generally, though, somebody who believes that if God commands something, then it is good. Then it's good. Is believing in God as a subject, but
theory under this categorization.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, there's one form of subjectivism that I would have liked to see talked about a little bit more, which is sort of ideal observer theory, which is to say that a lot of subjectivists...
Ideal observer theory is so fucking stupid. I'm sorry. Like, let's posit a hypothetical person who thinks XYZ.
They don't merely take themselves to be reporting what they think. They think that they can make mistakes and that they're not necessarily always right about what they think, or rather that they believe, hey, I should adhere to the moral beliefs that I would have under more ideal circumstances. If I knew more information, was thinking clearly, was free of relevant biases, et cetera, et cetera. And so the subjectivist can feel like they're making a mistake. But it seems like your understanding of subjectivism implies that no, the subjectivist always thinks, at least the individual subjectivist, always thinks that they're right.
Oh, yeah.
Let me give something about this. Lacking information is not necessarily an inferior position from which to make a judgment. There are things that you can do when you lack information that you can't do if you have perfect information. So, for example, can an ideal observer ethically have a fair random competition? So, just as an example, say there is $1. And there are two people, each of whom want the $1. What's a fair way to give out that dollar? Well, it's $1, so let's just assume that you can't split it. Like, you can't tear the dollar in half and give it to each person. One person is going to end up with the dollar in the end. As a non-ideal observer, I can flip a coin. And I can have the other person, one person call heads and the other person call tails. And thereby, we will have a fair way to judge which person gets the dollar. But if I am an ideal observer, in that I have all of the relevant information, then I can't flip a coin. It's impossible for me to flip a coin. Because I know the outcome of every coin flip. Because I know all of the antecedent conditions and all consequent conditions. Because I'm an ideal observer. I have all of the information. Ergo, an ideal observer is not able to fairly give the dollar to one person or the other. Because as soon as they flip the coin, they'll know, before the coin flip has even happened, what the outcome will be. So in actual fact, they would be deciding which person to give the dollar to. And there is no way for them to randomly do so. So there's no fair way for them to give the dollar. Versus me, as a non-ideal observer, coin flips are random. Ergo, I can give out the dollar. So ideal observers do not necessarily don't really rescue anything, I don't think. I think ideal observer theory doesn't work.
Yeah, well, there's sort of a question about how to characterize ideal observer theories, about whether to count as subjectivist or realist. So there's sort of a semantic question. Because I start saying, well, the subjectivists think that what's good or bad or right or wrong depends upon the attitudes of observers. And then you're like, okay, but what if they think it depends upon the attitudes of a hypothetical observer, not an actual observer? Should that count?
Wow. I have I have an interesting thing to say about society. That thing that you just appealed to like a second ago. God, this guy is so fucking stupid. Society is a hypothetical observer. Because society is not an observer. Like, you're personifying society in order to make statements about what you think subjectivists would say.
Count. No, I don't know. That's a semantic question whether that will count. You could count it as a form of naturalism instead, because it doesn't depend upon it doesn't depend on anyone's actual attitudes, just the hypothetical attitudes.
Well, these hypotheticals these would be like modal claims, and you would lump that under natural claims.
Well, like I say, it's not really clear how you should classify it. But this is just like a semantic question about how to taxonomize ethical theories.
A vor fetishist would hope we live in a society, assuming society is a person.
Right. Well, I'm trying to express the general discontent that I hear from anti-realists, specifically like Sharon Street and company. They'll say things like, the realists underestimate the tools that we have at our disposal. So if, let's say, morality grounds ultimately in a subject's desires, okay? Well, most of the time, in practice...
Why a subject's desires?
A lot of us have a desire for, bring ourselves to have fewer contradictions in our worldview, or to think clearly, or to, deliberate for an adequate period of time, or whatever it is, that they have these stance improving desires present much of the time. And it's from that like springboard where they can start to do a lot of deliberation that would resemble what a realist's a path of deliberation would look like as well.
It's hard for me to see how they explain somebody acting wrongly. So if a person in fact does deliberate correctly and then they come to some decision and they do the thing in accordance with the decision, then everything's fine. They can explain why the person did that. But suppose that the person doesn't deliberate correctly, they don't spend enough time, or they have one of these weakness of will moments, whatever. So they do what we would normally call the wrong thing. They act wrongly or irrationally or something like that. It's not clear to me how the anti-realists are going to explain that. So they could say, well,
what? That's easy to explain. They reasoned wrongly. Fuck. That fucked me up so badly. I just fucking
the person had some desire to deliberate correctly and they didn't do it. But given that they didn't do it, it must be that desire was not as strong as their desire to do whatever other thing they did. And
why does that follow? Why does that follow? That just doesn't follow at all.
you guys don't have any notion of a desire being objectively correct or incorrect. So why wasn't my desire to just, whatever, act impulsively, why wasn't that just like an equally valid thing to act on?
Well, it seems like we can distinguish between the explanation for why people are acting a certain way and the alleged justification, right? If it ultimately bounds on desires, one theory would be we always and ultimately always do what we most desire in any given moment. And then another theory would say we can actually do things that we don't.
Is it what we desire, or is it what comes to be our desire after the fact?
Want, or we could fail to do the things we most want, but what ultimately justifies our actions is a separate thing, and it's what we most want. Or so they can come apart for the subjectivist.
I mean, why would somebody do something other than what they most want? This is hard to understand.
Okay. It's because your guys' notion of want is terrible. Because you're unable to distinguish between, like, instantaneous wants and wants overall, which everybody in normal life can do. Somebody on a diet can say, I don't want to eat cake. But then they can say, oh, when I went into the kitchen at night and I saw that chocolate cake on the table, ooh, I wanted it so bad. And I ate it. Does that mean that they don't want to reject cake? Of course not, because they're talking on two different registers. This is obvious. It's so obvious. Please.
I mean, like, I can think of
Save
explanations
me.
within my own view, which would be like, oh, well, there are objective values, and the person believes that something is objectively wrong, even though that's the thing that they most want to do, so they don't do it, right? Because their moral belief overrides their desires. But if you think, no.
What? Hold on.
Oh, well, there are objective value explanations within my own view to understand. I mean, like, I can think of explanations within my own view, which would be like, oh, well, there are objective values, and the person believes that something is objectively wrong, even though that's the thing that they most want to do, so they don't do it.
But by your logic, wouldn't they have actually wanted to do the right thing, since they in fact didn't do it? Like their want to do the right thing overrode their want to do the wrong thing, in your view? Hold on, I need to make sure I'm not, like, getting fucked up here.
Do something other than what they most want. This is hard to understand. I mean, like, I can think of explanations within my own view, which would be like, oh, well, there are objective values, and the person believes that something is objectively wrong, even though that's the thing that they most want to do, so they don't do it. Right?
Yeah, if it's hard for you to understand why somebody would do something other than what they most want, then this should be similarly inconceivable to you. Because shouldn't it just be the case that they did what they most wanted, which was to follow the moral law, or their moral intuitions? So one want overrode another. But if you're going to allow that this is different for you, that an ethical intuition overriding overriding a desire counts as a legitimate example of somebody not doing what they desire, then why can't the people you're arguing against do the exact same thing? Because you've already allowed it that this is the case.
Right, because their moral belief overrides their desires. But if you think, no, there's only desires, then I don't understand what would cause you to act against your desires.
What about
it? Why is that any different? You just desired that to follow the moral law more than you desired to not do it. Again, assuming your own view of things.
Separating judgment from desire. And you say the subjectivist is justified insofar as an action is coherent with not only their set of desires, but also their moral judgments, their moral beliefs. And so they can act by what they think would be right or wrong.
No, but on the subjectivist view, like, there's no source of motivation other than desires. So, okay, so, like, if you're a subjectivist, then your moral beliefs are just maybe their beliefs about your desires.
Why would that be the case with yours? why isn't it the case that conforming to the moral law is not also a desire in your metaethical view? Like, this just seems so obvious to me that if you believe everybody does what they want and that it just bottoms out in desire, then an ethical intuition will never override a desire unless you have the desire to go along with that ethical intuition. This is basic. What are we doing?
Desires. So what? How does that give you a different source of motivation? Okay, and there could be a belief about your future desires. Okay, so maybe I want to do X now, but I also believe that tomorrow I will wish that I had done Y. So does that give me a reason to do Y instead of X? No, it doesn't. Right? Because there's no objective fact. Okay, so maybe I want to do X now, but I also believe that tomorrow I will wish that I had done Y. So does that give me a reason to do Y instead of X? No, it doesn't. Right? Because there's no objective fact that I have to care about the future.
But if you have the desire to care about the future, then that is a reason. This is...
Right, so if today I don't care about the future, then I have no reason to do the thing that I'm going to wish that I'd done later.
Well, if they think
yeah, but if you do care about the... Again, this is just like... This would obviate anything from being subjective, under your view. Like, I could run the exact same argument about, like tastes of food, or like what foods you like, So like, say I'm gonna regret having eaten this Taco Bell later because I'm gonna be on the toilet. Well, I guess that there must be stance-independent facts about whether or not I should eat Taco Bell. Well, I guess in a sense there might be because of veganism. Let's pick something else. I don't know. Really spicy vegan chili. If I'm gonna eat really spicy vegan chili, is there like an objective fact about whether or not I should do that? I mean, I wouldn't say so, but under your example, the fact that I refuse to eat this spicy vegan chili right now because later on it will give me diarrhea. This is like inconceivable to you. This is inconceivable to you without like some further objective fact about caring about the future. Why can't it just be that I desire to care about the future? Again, I'm not that kind of subjectivist anyway. But God, his arguments are so bad.
Like their ideal self would want to do A, but they most in the moment want to do B. But if they factored in the desire to do what their ideal self would want, they really should do A. So
like, why do I have to do what the ideal self would want? Like, we're calling it ideal, but that's sort of question begging, right? Okay, so there's this modified version of me, which is not how I actually am, which would want X. So what do I...
Like, what do you mean? Why? What reason do you have? It's because you want to. That's all. That's the reason. It's because you want to follow what this abstracted ideal self does. It's that simple. It's that simple.
I care about that. I have a reason to do the thing that I actually want to do. Okay, and you might think, oh no, well, you have reason.
What do you mean you actually? But you just said that if you didn't do it, then you don't actually want to do it. So if they don't do it, then they didn't actually want to do it. And why didn't they actually want to do it? Because they wanted to live up to this ideal self instead. This is...
to do the thing that the ideal self would want because you care about the ideal self, or maybe you have like this separate desire to conform to what the ideal self would do. Well, if I really had that desire, then I would have done the thing, right? Or if I had the desire and it was strong enough, then I would have done that thing. If I didn't do it, then that desire was outweighed by my desire to do whatever.
Right. If it's truly what I most wanted to do, I would have just done it anyways. There's no point in deliberating in the first place.
Why can't it be? Why are desires fixed? Why can't it be that your desire changed? It was what you wanted to do until you thought about it, and then you realized you didn't want to do it. Because you realized something that changed it, you know? Like, your desire to do something changes with new information, and you gain new information via reflection. So this is just like, there's no contradiction here. It's not that you really wanted to do the thing that you ended up doing via deliberation. It's that you got new information that changed what you wanted to do. You didn't really want to do it before, and now you're not doing it. You just really, you didn't want to do it before, and now you do want to do it, or vice versa.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it could be that, I don't know, maybe you want to deliberate and then you find out more, right? Okay, but in the circumstance where, like, we would want to say the person did the wrong thing or acted irrationally or something. So, take that case. It had to be that their desire to do that thing outweighed whatever other desires they would have to do the other thing.
But can't you be wrong about what you actually desire? And you could just, due to a lack of self-awareness, lack of embodiment, a lack of being in the present moment, whatever it is, you're not actually truly aware of what you most wanted. And then after the fact,
this is just incoherent. Like, the host is trying, but like, this is not how it works. Like, there's no fact of the matter about what you most wanted necessarily, because what you most wanted is not, it's contextual. So the act of deliberation changes what you most want. It's not like that you are discovering something inside of you that was already there, waiting for you to uncover and to excavate. And this is what I most wanted to do. No, you are creating a new desire for what you want to do via the deliberative process. And that's like perfectly fine. Like, that's not a bad thing. But it kind of undermines the whole point of this discussion. Again, we're stuck in representation, we have to say that this desire represents something underneath that you're just discovering, but it's not what it is. It's generated in the actual process of thinking about it. Okay.
You feel a sense of regret because that latent desire that you were not accounting for in your deliberation then shows its face. Shoot, I made a mistake.
I mean, human psychology is complex. I was just thinking that you'd be motivated by
you know nothing about it.
Desires that you actually have. And the way you're describing it makes it sound like, well, you're motivated by your belief that you have a desire.
Yeah, this is so fucking annoying. Like, I'm so tired of this. Desires are not fixed things. They're not these fixed things that you have within you that you uncover. Your desires change constantly, all the time. You have conflicting desires within you. Sometimes some win and others win at other times. And you just recuperate them as your own later. Or you reject them later if they made you feel bad. And you attribute it to something else. Like, this is so basic. This is so basic.
Desire. But isn't it more that you're just motivated by the desire? If you desire to do A, then that's just going to make you do A, whether you believe that you desire to do A or not.
But what if the desire is changing? What if there's a war inside of your body between the different forces, and sometimes some drives win out and sometimes other drives win out?
There's a careful distinction I think we can draw within desires, which is one would be present desires, or desires that you feel the fire of if you introspect, right? And then on the other hand, you have another sort of desire, which are your general dispositions.
Yeah.
And you could have a disposition that doesn't quite have, the heat and the fire behind it in the moment of deliberation. And then after the fact, you go, shoot, I do have this longer term dispositional desire that I failed to account for. And then I made a mistake upon reflection.
Yeah.
Your desires changed. This is easy enough to solve.
But it seems like you're kind of assuming that this whatever longer term desire is more important. But what would make it more important? Why not just act on the desire of the moment? Okay, and if you believe in objective...
Because you could have... Okay, even within your own framework, you could have a desire to act on the long-term desire. Like, it's a second-order desire. It's a second-order want. This is very easy to account for. Even on this, calcified view of desire, where, the desires are, there inside of you, and they're on this ordered hierarchy, and you can discover where on the hierarchy they lie. Even on that view, you can have a second order desire to value future desires. This is not incoherent. This is really easy.
Truths, then it could be that one of them is objectively just more important. It could be that one of them corresponds to sort of like the objective values.
But what if we build the entire subjectivist theory around these longer term dispositions?
Yeah.
And say that, okay, the reason I didn't do what I, quote unquote, think is right, or what I'm, quote unquote, actually committed to, is because the desires in the moment kind of grabbed me, and pulled me in the wrong direction. But, with the benefit of hindsight, I realized, shoot, if I actually weighed up the desires that really matter, the dispositional desires, these longer term desires, then I made a mistake.
Yeah. But then, like, what would make those the desires that really matter? Because that sounds
because
like...
you desire that they really matter. This is like this. Oh my god, this is killing me, man.
Like sort of an objective evaluative judgment.
This is just like an incompetent discussion. Because neither of these people have any idea what they're talking about.
Right. I mean, it sounds like that's not just based on desires. Right. And that's the claim, is that the longer term desires are like more real desires, but I don't think that's true.
Right. So they're sort of making they're making an objective evaluative claim by saying those are the correct desires.
No, they don't need to be making an objective evaluative claim. They're making a subjective evaluative claim about what they value, their longer term or their shorter term desires.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point in the book where I suggest that there are these different constraints that you could try to add to make it so that sometimes you can criticize somebody's action as irrational. Mm-hmm. But I think the constraints that you would want to add require some objective evaluative judgment. Okay, so like you might...
I don't think actions can be irrational necessarily. Like, I don't understand where this is going, but certainly preferences can't be irrational, but I don't know that actions can be irrational either, like in an objective sense, at any rate.
I think, I have to take into account my future desires. If I'm going to have a future desire that's going to be stronger than my current desire, I have to take that into account. Otherwise, I'm being irrational. Okay, so you might think that, like, when the student wants to party tonight, but they also have a big test tomorrow, and they know that tomorrow they're going to wish that they had studied for the test. So then, but right now they don't want to, and right now they have a strong desire to stay and party all night. Okay, so you might think, so then you're rationally required to take into account the future desire. Maybe the future desire will be stronger because maybe it'll last for a longer time, but you'll wish that you'd done better on the test. Okay, all that. Okay, and then you have...
Yeah, I know it's just rational choice theory.
Okay, so that's a case where it seems like you should take into account the stronger future desire. And then there's the famous case of Odysseus and the sirens, where he knows that he's going to sail past the sirens, and as soon as he hears their song, he's going to have an overpowering desire to join the sirens. And suppose that he knows that desire will be so strong, will vastly outweigh his current desire to live. Okay, so why is he not obligated to take into account that future desire? Right, so he's not, right? So he can deliberately act right now to frustrate that future desire, even though it's going to be stronger than his current desire. Okay, and that's totally rational. And so how do we explain this? And it looks like you need something more than just the strength of desires. Right. You need some like evaluative judgment, like, well, what is actually...
Yeah, but you can go even further into the future and just say that further into the future, Odysseus will have an even stronger desire to live. Like, this is... Oh my god. Okay, I need to skip this section because I'm just... They're just saying the same thing over and over again, and it's killing me. The principle of... Oh yeah, this is the idea that if something seems correct, it's true.
And the strength of desires.
Right, but just to be like ultra clear here, we're fundamentally grounding out in an intuition here. That just seems wrong or it seems irrational for the student to party all night instead of studying, or for Odysseus to untie himself and jump into the water. It just seems wrong, and it kind of...
I don't think it doesn't seem wrong to me. It seems fine.
That's where the buck stops. It's some fundamental intuition we have.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Not everybody has that intuition.
Like you said, so what's wrong with subjectivism is it conflicts with things that just seem to be the case to us. Yeah, that's what's wrong with every false philosophical theory. Like, that's what's wrong with everything that's false. Right? The sense in which that my objections all come down to that is the sense in which all objections come down to that. Right? Like, every time you object to a theory, there's something that seems right to you. That's the basis for objecting to that theory. So in fact, it doesn't even have to be about ethics.
Yeah, but it's your seemings, apparently, that matter over everyone else's. Like, I don't even necessarily disagree with the meta point that when something is wrong, it's because it seems wrong. Like, I think a better way to put it is that it affects us in a way that is displeasurable, but or like diminishes us is maybe a better way to say it. But it's it does not it does not mean that everybody has the same intuitions or the same seemings.
Ethics or philosophy, right?
Right, and I guess we take a detour, and this is what you call the principle of phenomenal conservatism. What is that principle?
Well, basically the principle that it makes sense to assume that things are the way they seem unless you have specific reasons to doubt that.
Right.
Okay, so that works for all kinds of things. So, okay, well, why do I think that there's a table here? I mean, it looks like there's a table, and I don't have any reason to doubt it. Okay, so that's a species of there seeming to be a table. Okay, yeah, why do I think that murder is wrong? It seems wrong to me, and I don't have any specific reasons to think otherwise.
Okay, so
I mean, you just say you don't have any specific reasons to think otherwise, but when you say murder seems wrong, is the seeming that there is a stance independent fact about what murder, like that says murder is wrong, that there are abstract objects out there that instantiate the claim murder is wrong, or does it just diminish you when the concept enters your consciousness?
There's a few places we can go from here, but I want to wrap up with a negative argument and go straight into error theory, wielding this, this principle of phenomenal conservatism. We should just believe the things that most seem correct to us. Briefly, should we just believe all of our initial beliefs then?
Oh yeah,
so we'd be wrong, right? If you see a stick in water, it's bent. Is a stick bent? It seems that way. So should we believe that?
Yeah, it looks bent, but it's actually straight. Yeah, so that's why there's a qualifier, right? That I said, if you have no specific reasons to doubt it, right? Well, you could have specific reasons to doubt it. So you put the stick in.
Well, how do you know what a good reason or a bad reason is to doubt it? Just if the reason seems like a good reason or a bad reason?
In the glass of water and it looks bent, but if you feel it, you'll feel that it's straight. So then you have specific reasons for doubting the appearance of the bent.
Really? But what if it seems like my visual cortex is a better indicator?
Stick.
So you factor that in as well. You also factor in maybe your knowledge of refraction and other things. And then what seems to be true after that is what you should believe.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. The reasons for doubt would come from other appearances.
Okay. Now, with phenomenal conservatism in our back pocket, let's go after error theory or nihilism. What's wrong with nihilism?
Yeah, it just conflicts with completely obvious things, right? So like on the nihilist view, Adolf Hitler did nothing wrong. Right, that's their view.
No. Again, it's that we have... Again, this is just like... This is just the same exact straw man that everybody fucking says about error theory. And again, I'm not an error theorist because I guess technically I am, but it's more like I think error theorists are wrong to think that their view of morality in specific is special. But it doesn't... It seems very obvious to me that Hitler did something wrong. I know, bold statement. But it does not seem obvious to me that there is a stance-independent fact that instantiates Hitler did something wrong. These are like two different claims. In the same way, it seems to me that pineapple sucks. It seems to me that pineapple is bad, that is gross. But is there a stance-independent fact about the idea that pineapple is gross? Do I think it's like stance-independently true? Does it seem to me stance-independently like pineapple is gross? No. Obviously not. I can do this a lot. It seems to me that Avengers Age of Ultron is a bad movie. But does it seem to me that there is an objective aesthetic value attached to Age of Ultron, which makes it a bad movie? No, it doesn't seem that way to me at all. So there's like different levels. So unless you are ready to accept gastronomic realism on the grounds that on the grounds of intuition too, then this argument fails.
It's not because they're Nazis, right? Because they think nobody has ever done anything wrong because nothing is wrong. Okay, but the view that Adolf Hitler did nothing wrong is just absurd. And so, in order,
but it's not the view that Adolf Hitler did nothing. It's not the view that Adolf Hitler did nothing wrong. It's the view that there are no stance-independent moral facts that instantiate the claim that Adolf Hitler did something stance independently wrong. These are two different claims, and again, you conflate them because it's rhetorically effective for you to do so, but it doesn't actually reflect the underlying, like, the underlying claim that the error theorist is making. They still make evaluative judgments. And they can still, by the way, be fictionalists who say that moral discourse is fine. It's fine to do moral discourse.
This view, you have to have some amazing argument. Like, you have to have an argument whose premises are so obviously correct and whose inferences are so obviously correct that it's more clear that that argument is correct than it is that Hitler did something wrong. And
it's clear to me that Hitler did something wrong. And it's also clear to me that there is no, like, stance-independent arbiter of the universe that makes what Hitler did wrong. It's my judgments about it. It's the way that it affects me. It's the and the way that, like, the suffering affects me and others. Like, it has nothing to do with there being stance-independent facts about it. And in fact, if the stance-independent facts about morality said otherwise, like, if you proved to me using a math equation that actually the non-natural objective moral facts say that Hitler did the right thing, I would still think that Hitler did something wrong. I would say, who fucking cares what the universe has to say about this? What if it just doesn't matter to me what the stance-independent facts say? What can you... Who cares about morality? What about morality? Which is just my personal view about it. Why should I care about morality over schmorality? Is there like a non-circular argument for why? No, there isn't. You can appeal to morality and say you should care about morality because it's moral that you do so, but it's schmoral that I care about schmorality. So regardless of what the moral facts are, according to you, I can just do whatever I want anyway, because there's no non-moral reason for me to do them. Good question, Shadencore. I guess the universe is impotent to do anything.
That's just a tall order, and that's not going to be satisfying.
Right. It just seems to be the case that, you know, Hitler did something.
This is like such stupid philosophy. Like, you actually, like, such incuriosity. It just seems to me like it's the case, and I'm not going to investigate it any further. Like, what a fucking joke, man. Also, again, doesn't address relativism at all in this. Because if I'm a relativist about truth, I can easily say that Hitler did something wrong. And it doesn't imply anything about what the global or absolute truths are.
Wrong is truer than the nihilist contention.
Yeah,
right.
There are.
All right, I want to see what he says about somebody who doesn't have realist intuitions.
In a bit, but I do want to press. I want to use the principle of phenomenal conservatism, which is what you're alluding to, which is seemings are all that we have. It turtles all the way down. Like, that's all we ultimately have, and I'll completely accept that. And so the main arguments against subjectivism and error theory is that they seem wrong. Like, it seems like there's certain things that are right or wrong, right? But what if someone, for whatever reason, maybe it's because they have the scientism kind of latent in their worldview or whatever, they just reject those intuitions. That it seems to them that no, Hitler didn't do something wrong in this like mind dependent stance. Hitler did something wrong in a subjective stance because I don't like it. Like, what if that's my intuition? Like, what can you even?
It's a good question, interviewer. Let's see what he's got to say.
Say that person.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who, I guess, moral realism seems implausible to them, and then, but I mean, I guess to correct a little bit what you said. Like, when I argue for moral realism, I don't just say moral realism seems true. I would say things that were much more specific than that. So, so I'd ask you to consider if society approved of torturing babies, would it be okay to torture babies? Like, if you live in a society where baby torture is accepted, should you torture a baby? And then most people's intuitive reaction to that is no. Then I say, okay.
Okay. Well, of course you don't. Well, I was going to say, of course you wouldn't think so because you live in a society where that wasn't the case, and you were raised in a society where that wasn't the case. But society actually is okay with torturing babies in a lot of cases. Um, uh, so long as that baby is a Palestinian or an animal, for example. But
okay, is accepted. Should you torture a baby? And then most people's intuitive reaction to that is no. Then I say, okay, so then let's accept that you shouldn't torture the baby in that scenario. So then that refutes cultural relativism.
No, that doesn't. No, I'm so tired of it. Cultural relativism does not entail that because you take your morality above other cultures' morality, that therefore you have refuted cultural relativism. So let me make a statement about what cultural relativism actually says. Cultural relativism says that different cultures have different perspectives on what is moral and what is immoral. All right? That's claim 1. Claim 2 of cultural relativism is that there is no culturally independent way of ranking perspectives. That's it. So, it is perfectly consistent to be a cultural relativist and also believe that some cultures have worse moral standards than other cultures. This is a completely consistent stance because you can just acknowledge that your ranking of one culture over another is a culturally specific ranking, which is specific to your culture. The claim that Huemer is making would actually be cultural absolutism, because it would be saying that in an absolute sense, all cultures are equally ranked in terms of their morality. But a cultural relativist does not have to believe that. They don't believe, in fact, that all cultures are equally good in like a stance independent sense. They don't believe that. They believe that all cultures have their own culturally specific orderings of which cultures are better or worse, and that none of those perspectives are privileged over any other. But you can't step outside of it. There is no outside to step through. So you have not refuted cultural relativism by saying that somebody who is in a culture where baby torture is okay shouldn't torture babies, because you're just speaking from your own cultural perspective, and in doing so you rank order the culture without baby torture over the culture with it. And that's perfectly consistent with cultural relativism. Subjectivism, or not subjectivism, sorry, relativism does not mean that all perspectives are equal, that every view is as good as every other view. This is not what it means. If every view were as good as every other view, that would be absolutism. That would be saying that objectively, all views are equally ranked. And that's not what a relativist wants to say, because they don't want to say anything about the objective ranking of all views. There are only perspectival rankings of different perspectives. That's the whole point. Jesus.
And then so I just go through the different theories. Okay, so there's like, then there's a non-cognitivist theory, and I say, okay, well, does this make sense? I wonder whether abortion is wrong. And then they would have the intuition that that does make sense, and then there'd be an inference.
Yeah, I've already explained, but there's a difference between the semantics of a sentence and the pragmatics of a sentence. This is obvious to anybody who has talked to a real person.
from there to abortion is wrong is not a non-cognitive statement. Okay. So like it's not just a direct appeal to the intuition for realism. So the person who thinks that moral realism is intrinsically implausible, I would give them arguments. All these arguments would start from intuitions, like basically all philosophical arguments do, right?
I mean, don't you think it's at least in theory possible that someone just flat out rejects the specific intuitions you appeal to argue against either subjectivism or nihilism? Like it seems perfectly reasonable, and I surely have met people who factually so would just reject the existence of this intuition that no, Hitler didn't do something wrong. David torture isn't wrong. It's really just an expression of our emotions or whatever. Where it's really just it's fake. It's none of this is real. It's all just there's only descriptive facts. Like that's their intuition. That's their initial seeming.
Well,
isn't it possible that there's no to take the anti.
I mean, isn't it possible that there are people outside of you, Michael Huemer, who have different perspectives?
Realists line sound deliberative route from their actual starting point to your realist conclusions, and if that's so, isn't that reasons to reject realism?
So I guess there's two things that you could be worrying about. Like you could be worrying about a hypothetical person. So can you construct a person?
No, a real person. There are real people who believe that. You can't just ignore them.
Hypothetically, he would have no reason to accept moral realism. Obviously so. You could do this for any proposition. Imagine a person who just doesn't have the appearances by which they would come to know the proposition. Then, okay, and is that a reason for us to worry? No, because again, if that applies to every proposition that we know, then it shouldn't be a reason to doubt moral realism. The other thing is, well, you might worry about maybe some actual people are like this. Now, I don't think that this is what usually happens. So what usually happens when you give people these arguments is not that they just claim to not have the intuitions at all. I don't think. I think there are some people who just have a very strong sense that moral realism.
I will claim it. I claim it. I don't have that intuition. I don't have the meta-ethical intuitions that you'd have. It seems like it seems as crazy to me as thinking that there are objective facts about like what movie is best. Like it's on the same level to me on a first glance. And I can be passionate about it. And there's nothing stopping me from wanting to enforce that morality or from like questioning it. But it doesn't seem to me that the universe is going to like has like stance independent facts that instantiate my rightness or wrongness. It isn't written in the laws of the universe that it's wrong to do anything. It's just like it's a completely impotent thing to say. Like what does it do? Again, we need to stop thinking about like what does a moral claim represent, and we need to start thinking about what the moral claims do. Like how do they function? What does it do when we say murder is wrong or that Hitler did something wrong? It clearly doesn't say anything about like the outer universe, right? It doesn't apply to that at all. So what does it do to say that it stands independently wrong? What does that functionally do? What is the functional difference between just saying murder is wrong and saying murder is stance independently wrong? Well, there is a functional difference socially in the sense that you can then try to impose a particular way of living over all people. So that's one thing. It justifies a particular kind of moral chauvinism. But explanatorily, what does it do? What does it help explain about like the way that the universe is or the way that our moral psychology is? That's actually the next one, is the evolutionary debunking argument, I think.
Realism is implausible. Now, I don't think that that's exactly intuitive. I think that they have some other reasons that have made them think that.
So you just think that they're wrong because you think that they're liars, or you think that they're mistaken. Earlier, you said that you didn't think people could be mistaken about what they want, but now apparently they can be mistaken about what it seems like to them. So, like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, it's just...
So like it might be that they think that it's unscientific because they've learned a lot about scientific theories and none of the scientific theories talk about moral values. So then I think they're just making an incorrect inference.
But if these people obviously exist, though, right? That they're people who they have these intuitions that just don't match your intuitions in these given crucial cases. Surely, in 8 billion people, there's one.
Oh yeah. By the way, like there are some people who don't have the moral intuition. So like there are psychopaths who just like totally don't.
Oh, this is just not correct. Like, of course, we had to throw in psychopaths under the bus. Psychopaths have moral intuitions. That's just a fact. They can have moral intuitions. They can have intuitions about what's right and wrong. There's nothing in their psychology or their physiology that precludes them from having opinions about what's right and wrong. Absolutely nothing.
They don't understand morality. By the way, like they can sort of use intuition. So like there are psychopaths who just like totally don't understand morality. By the way, like they can sort of use moral language because they can try to imitate other people's moral language, but there's reasons.
Oh my god, this is horrible. No, 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 no. That's not okay. Psychopathy is about your empathetic responses to things. Just because you don't have empathetic responses does not mean that you're parroting moral language or that you don't have affects at all. Because if you didn't have affects at all, you would be dead. You wouldn't be an organism. My god.
Understand what we're talking about. Like literally. They have no idea why you shouldn't torture a baby. Okay, so then
they can. Again, this is just ableist bullshit, but whatever. I've come to expect this shit from philosophers at this point.
And that's a real situation. You might think, oh, does that give us reason to doubt the existence of morality? And basically, I would say, well, it's kind of like when there are colorblind people, and the people who do see colors, they don't thereby conclude that colors don't exist. They just think, oh, well, something went wrong with that person. So,
oh no! Oh my god! Colorblind people are just inferior, I suppose. Something went wrong with them. Like this is what I mean. It can't be that there are legitimately different perspectives on things. It always has to be that someone is right and someone is wrong. And of course it's always Michael Huemer that's right. Because it seems like he's the one who's right.
What do you think's going? But there's non-psychopath anti-realists who want to with this. Because the common response is when you give the appeal.
Yeah, the host is like really trying here, and this host has not like done a fantastic job or anything, but like he's really trying here to like get Michael Huemer to see that there are other people in this world who exist that have different opinions than him. And Michael Huemer is just like obstinate on this point. No, nobody who thinks differently than me exists. And if they do think differently than me, well, it must be that there's something wrong with them. They can't legitimately think differently than me. There must be something metaphysically, spiritually, morally wrong with how they think.
To Hitler or appeal to baby torture or whatever, they'll just say no. When you say is that wrong, what you're really saying is this stance independently wrong. And I don't have that intuition at all. I don't have the intuition that
this is what I was saying earlier.
It even makes sense to talk about stance independence. Anything. I mean, we can even talk about stance independence facts in physics. Why would we talk about that in morality? It makes no sense. So they just don't. That intuition is just absolutely absent for these people.
But just as a side point, if this person thinks that morality is subjective in the same way that they think physics is subjective, maybe we shouldn't worry about that. Like when you worry about moral anti-realism, like you're worried about them thinking that morality is unreal in a way that other things are real, right? Like if they think morality is just like physics, okay, like and then you have some weird view about how physics isn't real, but like you treat it exactly like it's real. Like everybody else does.
Elevate morality to the status of physics.
This is fucking fictionalism. This is like an accepted view in error theory. Is fictionalism. You treat moral discourse as if it refers to something real, even though you don't believe it does. God. This is so upsetting, man. This is the level that analytic philosophers are on sometimes. There are good analytic philosophers. I don't mean to disparage all analytic philosophy, but like this is the level that some of them operate on. it's just like, it's mind-boggling to me that somebody could say something like this.
That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
But anyway, like, oh well, like I'm not claiming to just intuit that moral realism is true. Right? When I say baby torture is wrong, I'm not just directly saying it's intuitive that it's an objective fact. Right? I'm just saying there's a few intuitions that we would go through to conclude that it's an objective fact. Right? First, there's going to be an intuition that like Hitler did something wrong or baby torturing is wrong. Then there's going to be an intuition that if society were to change their attitudes towards it, you still shouldn't do it. And then there's going to be an intuition that if I were to change my attitudes towards it, I still shouldn't do it. Okay. And then there's going to be the like Frege-Geach intuition. So like it's going to be you have to put all of these together to conclude that it stands independently wrong.
All right. Well, let's take that on its face then. Let's say non-cognitivism wrong for linguistic reasons, naturalism wrong for epistemological reasons, subjectivism and error theory wrong for various intuitions we have against what is wrongness seems to be stance independent. That's the negative argument. Okay. So now we're forced to conclude intuitionism, objective morality is true by appeals to a negative argument. That's a little unsatisfactory for some people. People want to see a positive argument. What is the positive argument for objective morality?
Like the things that we describe, which are the argument, right? That is, you think about certain things and certain things just seem right and certain things just seem wrong, right? And then you can have arguments that that's not subjective and it is not non-cognitive, it is cognitive, right? And so, I mean, most people think that there's some...
What if people just fucking disagree about the specific examples? How do you decide which of their intuitions or which of their seemings is correct?
Serious objections to this, right? And so like part of what I should do is just like, oh, well, I should explain how it is that we would know the moral truth, and I should explain why the objections that people want to raise would not be correct, right? Like, so like, I don't know that that's exactly what you mean by positive argument, right?
So it seems like they're kind of one and the same here. The argument for intuitionism or objective morality ultimately rests on the principle of phenomenal conservatism, which is saying we should take things as they seem unless we have defeaters, let's say. And there's no defeaters against objective morality because all the other explanations fail. So we're forced to conclude that objective morality is...
I mean, there are pretty good defeaters, in my opinion. I've tried to explain them here. Like, there are a lot of defeaters against non-naturalism.
It's true. Things are as they seem, right?
Yeah. So yeah,
but the common issues people have with intuitionism is they go, hey, there is a defeater. We can explain our moral intuitions. In fact, we have a pretty good explanation. It's evolution. This is Sharon Street's evolutionary debunking argument, which, by the way, you addressed before her paper, which I thought was funny. I don't think most people know that, because I think your book came out the year before her paper did. Before her paper, which I thought was a pretty good explanation. It's evolution. This is Sharon Street's evolutionary debunking argument, which, by the way, you addressed before her paper, which I thought was funny.
Okay. Let me go over the evolutionary debunking argument, because it's not as it doesn't necessarily say that morals are like genetically ingrained, or it doesn't need to. Maybe Street's argument does say that, but the better argument, or the better version of the argument, is basically just that we are organisms, right? And whatever we believe as organisms has to go through a selection process that determines our survival as an organism. And so it could be that, or in fact, not just that it could be, by the fact that certain values have proliferated and others have not, it must be that some values conferred either neutral survival advantage or positive survival advantage. Or if it conferred negative survival advantage, it didn't do so to the extent that it outweighed the other ones. And obviously, evolution is more complicated than this. But the main point is that as organisms, our values come to reflect the mode of our existence and our survival. And this would remain true no matter what the stance-independent facts about morality are. Presumably, for any given organism, the values that are most conducive to its survival are going to be independent of what the actual moral facts are, if they exist. So if it's the case that there are moral facts, we can't know anything about them, because the reasons for our seemings, for our intuitions, are not in any way causally related to those stance-independent facts. They are causally related to our survival as an organism, or as a culture, or as a society, or as a species, or whatever abstraction level you want to get at. The point is that the causal mechanism that underpins this is not one that has anything to do with detecting the stance-independent fact. We might actually, I think you could probably compare it to something like Nietzsche's idea of necessary falsification in the navigation of the world of an organism. That necessarily the organism falsifies the world, or creates falsifications of the world that are conducive to its survival, as opposed to ones which are true. So it could be that morality is just this, that even if there are stance-independent moral facts, whatever they could be, there is our seemings, our intuitions, whatever you may call them, may be entirely falsified by the fact that we are an organism that lives in the world and has to operate in the world and is affected by the world and affects the world. And thus, our seemings are not are not produced by these inert stance-independent facts, but are instead produced by this interactive system. And this interactive system would produce those same exact values in us, no matter what the stance-independent facts were. It's completely independent of them. That's my explanation of the evolutionary debunking argument.
I don't think most people know that, because I think your book came out the year before your paper did.
2005, yeah.
Right. But nonetheless, the argument goes something like, evolution, it is evolutionarily advantageous for us to have, to develop empathy or a sensitivity towards reputation risks or a disposition towards caring about those who are nearest and dear to us. And it is from those places that we derive, or that we extend into moral conclusions. But if we have an explanation, if we have an evolutionary explanation for these faculties, then maybe the better explanation for why they're there is not that they track some truth of the matter, but rather they just happen to be fit given our ancestral environment.
Yeah. But by the way, like Michael Ruse was saying this for many years, right? Which is why,
Nietzsche was saying this. This is not like, to be clear, not necessarily in those exact terms, but like something similar about the idea of falsification, or necessary falsification, that for the purpose of organismic survival.
I was responding to it in that book before Sharon Street. I don't know why people don't, like now they're only citing Street and they're not citing Ruse. I don't know why.
Fixing the record.
Whatever. Well, people think that her version was better, but okay. I don't know. You can give evolutionary explanations of a lot of things. And some of them are sort of more compelling than others. Okay, like some of the evolutionary explanations are things where it seems like from understanding evolution, you would be able to predict how the thing we observe was going to be. But others are just things where it seems like you could just make up a story for the thing being any way that it turned out to be. Okay.
That's true. That's very true. Which is why I don't phrase the evolutionary debunking argument in terms of actual biological evolution. I phrase it in terms of just whatever the organism, environment, and constitution happens to be.
Okay, so if you didn't already know what people's moral intuitions were, but you heard about the theory of evolution, what would you predict?
Yes, this is true. Like, this is obviously, and again, maybe Streep's version of this is bad, but yes, obviously, it could be a just so story. But unless you can provide like your own causal mechanism here, then we're kind of just out of luck. And then I can just swoop in and say it doesn't need to be like genetically evolved. It can be that there were necessary falsifications for survival of any given organism that necessitate this kind of instantiation of seemings or intuitions or whatever.
And I would think you would predict something like maybe ethical egoism would be the dominant view. or something like that, or maybe something even more implausible, like people would think that maximizing reproduction was the good.
Right.
And then, okay.
I mean, if if you're like stupid, maybe. Like if you know nothing about evolution, then maybe that's what you would predict.
And so, but nobody thinks anything like that, right? Those theories are complete non-starters. There are some people who believe ethical egoism, but actually very few. Hardly anyone thinks that that's at all intuitive. Okay, so then you're like, oh, how is evolution explaining?
You fucking, oh my god, you literally gave a version of ethical egoism earlier. You said that people, or actually no, that would have been psychological egoism. Never mind. Oops.
Our moral beliefs. Well, it's certainly not predicting them, right? In fact, if anything, it's the opposite. It would seem to be, not with certainty, but at least with some probability, predicting their moral beliefs should be different from what they actually are.
No, not necessarily. Not if you actually understand evolution. You don't understand evolution, and this is the problem. You haven't listened to the lecture, Biology as Ideology by Richard C. Lewontin. This is your issue.
You can give stories about why the moral beliefs might not be what you would initially expect them to be. But when you start giving these kinds of stories, it's like, well, then you could accommodate such a huge range of possible moral intuitions if we had turned out to have those intuitions that it doesn't really give you evidence of anything.
Right. There's an infinite number of just so stories we can kind of come up with. If the contention is you should do what is in your self-interest, then you can come up with a pretty plausible evolutionary story for that. That, oh, hey, it's good, if you take care of yourself, you're more likely to reproduce, and that's good for fitness. But if the exact opposite belief were the contention, no, it's good to be altruistic, or at least to some degree altruistic, we go, oh, well, yeah, we can come up with a reason evolutionarily why that's that advantageous.
Yes. But the thing is that you can then test this, right? Like you can test it against novel cases. Or you can test it against like mathematical models, for example. This is not like the best way to do it by any means. Like we shouldn't mistake mathematical models for reality. But you can make assumptions and give tests about like what amount of cooperation is conducive to social formations. You can also just like do experiments of this, right? Like you can have experiments where people either are incentivized to cooperate or not and see how it changes. Like this is not impossible to test in principle. It doesn't need to remain a just so story. But again, I don't think that morality evolved in that specific of a way. I think that it's it is more general than that. Or not more general, but like even more granular than it's more granular than evolution.
Because if you take care of your tribe survives, and you're more likely to survive if you're in a thriving tribe, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So no matter what the contention is, you can come up with some story that sounds reasonable, that appeals to evolution, but ultimately, it's underdetermined. Like you can't actually figure out which is the correct, evolutionary story here, because you can fit any story to the belief.
Yeah. And so it's important, like sort of like where the burden of proof is. So in my view, we presume that things are the way they appear unless and until we have specific reasons for thinking otherwise. Some of the anti-realists, maybe most of them, maybe all of them, think it's the reverse, that you have to start by assuming there are no moral facts until they're proven to exist. Okay, so then they think the fact that you could give an explanation for our intuitions without appealing to the moral facts means that we don't have to believe in moral facts. But I think, no, there seem to be moral facts. So you have to give positive evidence that there aren't.
Is this just a crux then, that that's the end of the conversation? How do you reach across the aisle at that point? If you're starting from those different points.
Well, I mean, my claim is if you start from their point of view, then you have to be a radical skeptic, and they're not radical skeptics. So right, so that's not really what
You could be a pragmatist. There's nothing stopping you.
think. Like they don't think that about anything else. They're just special pleading about morality.
Okay, for what it's worth, I agree. People should be more skeptical of everything else too. We need to get epistemic expressivism too. We need affective theories rather than these other kinds of theories. So in that sense, I agree. But both sides are damned in this respect. That was a guess, by the way. That was a 50-50 faux show.
Well, they can be subjectivists, right?
Well, no, but I mean, like in general, they don't think that you have to assume that your observations are false unless they're proven correct, or they don't think you have to give positive evidence that your cognitive faculties are reliable before you're allowed to rely on them.
There's a lot of anti-realists who just go, oh, I just don't have that intuition. I just don't have these intuitions. And they just will, at every step of the way, they'll say, I don't have that intuition.
Yeah. So I mean, like some of them might be lying, just for rhetorical reasons.
Oh my god! Like, dude, fuck you. I'm sick of your shit, man. Like, oh, they might be lying. Well, do you have any evidence that they're lying? You just like think that they're lying, and so there must be lying. All right, I've been going for like probably 2 hours now. I cannot do another second of this video. It's late. I'm going to go to sleep. This was painful. This was painful, man. I can't believe the absolute state of philosophy right now that this person is respected in the field. This is just like unbelievably stupid. Yeah, I did humor him for I humored him for too long, exactly. Ugh. Yeah. Disgusting. Blech. Disgusting. All right. It's gonna be on a whim, Galadrift. It'll be completely on a whim. But anyway, goodbye, everybody. Thank you all for coming to my stream.